So, welcome everyone to the Messy Brilliance Show. It's Kelly. I am the founder of Women for One, and I am really honored today to be speaking to two incredible men that I believe have embodied the feminine in more ways than I have on some levels. I want to introduce them each differently so that they're both honored. First, I'd like to introduce Andrew Harvey, who is just he's just an incredible man. I've been moved by his writing for years. He's a writer of over 30 books. He is a respected religious scholar. He's taught all over the world. And he really is a teacher and an inspiration to all. And he's the director and founder of the Institute of Sacred Activism, which I really love that. And I cannot wait to discuss what that is for all of us to learn about it more and to dive into that piece as well as the book. And then I want to introduce the co-author of Evolutionary Love Relationships, Chris Saade. Saade. I just want to say honor his name right. Chris is an author and a life coach and a philosophical teacher. And he is the co-director of the Olive Branch Center with his wife, Jessie. So he has led over 250 multi-day cutting-edge workshops for professionals and the general public, and he continues to offer personal life coaching. So thank you both for being here. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Great, looking forward to it.
Wonderful. So before we dive into the book, Andrew, I'd love to ask you what your definition of sacred activism is. I have it in front of me, but I really just wanted to hear it from you.
Well, I believe that when you join together deep spiritual consciousness and the great peace and wisdom and passion that deep spiritual consciousness breeds in you, when you fuse that with a passion to see justice done and harmony lived on every level of the planet, then a force is born that is sacred activism. And that with this force of divinely inspired and guided love in divinely inspired action, we can change seemingly intractable and terrible problems, because it's a force that springs from a new evolutionary understanding of how we must bring together the deepest mystical awareness with the most radical action if we're going to be able to avoid the full catastrophic consequences of the crisis we're now in.
And what would you say this crisis, how would you define this crisis right now? Because I'm in agreement with you as well that we are in quite a huge crisis right now in humanity.
Well, anyone can see that this crisis that we're in is a shattering of all of our illusions about ourselves, about nature, and about actually the divine itself. All of our illusions are being shattered by a series of crises that all spring from our ignorance, our addiction to power, and our greed. And this crisis that is now manifesting actually threatens the whole future of humanity and a great deal of nature. It is a very, very serious and potentially lethal crisis. You can see it in two ways. You could see it in that description, or you could see it, as I see it, from a mystical point of view and from the point of view of the evolution of a new humanity. This crisis is the stage that corresponds to the authentic dark night in the mystical crisis. And what we're going through is a global dark night in which humanity will actually be stripped bare down to the root, and it will look like destruction, but what this destruction is preparing potentially is the creation of a new kind of humanity, an embodied divine humanity, a humanity devoted to justice and compassion, a humanity awoken by tragedy and heartbreak and the near loss of everything we hold sacred, to undergo a great transformation which will enable it to be the agents of divine love on and in the world. And this is what is, I believe, happening, and this is what makes what's happening so terrifying and so thrilling and so essential to bring the whole of one's spiritual intellect, mystical intellect, the whole of one's heart, the whole of one's being too, because it involves an act of the whole being to begin to enter into the ferocious glory of being born in a time like this.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I mean, do you believe in that expansion and contraction, and you feel like we're in that space of the contraction of our humanity right now, where we can
Yes.
expand into the next evolution? Is that what you're saying
Well, we
specifically?
can, because what happens in the authentic inner dark night is that the false self is systematically and ruthlessly destroyed by divine grace through a series of terrible ordeals and impossible situations. And all certainties go, all structures go, all illusions go, but what remains is a much deeper immersion in reality and a much greater, wilder love for the mystery. And over time, they prepare a wholly different level of consciousness, the birth into divine consciousness. And if you see that happening on the inner levels, as we've seen it again and again in the authentic mystical paths, then you have a clue as to what's happening on a global level now, which is that the old human way of dealing with everything and all the fantasies surrounding scientific progress and technological progress and our capacity to get through anything and everything, all of these are going to force our baptism in a much deeper consciousness, which, if we embody it in action, will enable us to co-create with the divine a wholly new world out of the ashes of this one. That's the dream, that's the prayer, that's the passion that drives
Embodying it in action. I love that. That's, yes,
Yes.
it's beautiful.
That's crucial because it has to be embodied in action, because the time is so fragile and dangerous that if it isn't embodied in action and simply talked about or experienced for oneself, what will be lost is the possibility for a transformation that could quite simply save us from extinction.
Yes. Chris, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think Andrew has put it so beautifully, both the great danger we are facing, the serious danger we are facing for our earth and for humanity, and also the incredible transformation and possibilities that are happening and becoming possible for us. I just want to emphasize what Andrew was speaking about, the destruction of the false self. I mean, I think there is we are experiencing a very powerful evolutionary leap in our thinking. We are coming to really understand from a philosophical and psychological perspective how damaging it is to stay in a false self, to live with masks and false self, and how important it is to recapture the profound meaning of authenticity, the profound meaning of living from our authentic self, from our truth, from our individual unique truth, and then taking that freedom, that great freedom to be who we are, and embodying it in love and action, embodying it in service for justice, for peace, for inclusion. But there is a shift happening, an evolutionary shift happening in our thinking. We are, for the first time, I think, in recorded history, understanding the profound implications of the word authenticity of the true self, of the true individual unique self, the importance of the freedom of that self, and also the profound meaning of solidarity or the pursuit of social justice that is part of who we are, because we are community beings, and not doing that will depress us, actually.
It's very grounded thinking. It's very about being on this earth, it seems, and embodying love, but taking that action as well. So what was the evolution, and either one of you can answer me, of creating this book, pardon the pun, Evolutionary Love Relationships, Passion, Authenticity, and Activism? Where did it come from? How was it birthed between the two of you?
Well, Chris and I are great friends, and I've had the honor of staying at Chris's house because I've taught with him in his institute, and we have had so many wonderful, wild, and holy conversations on so many subjects. But about 4 years ago, we decided that we would make a tape set on our vision of evolutionary love relationships. And we made a tape set, and then we decided that we would use the tape set as the basis for a book of dialogues. And so we plunged in and sharpened everything we said and said new things and created this golden dance that we've offered you in this book, Evolutionary Love Relationships. It's really at the heart of both of our work, and Chris has done such amazing work, which I've had the honor to participate in his extraordinary institute, in which he's trained all kinds of different people in Charlotte over many years to truly claim their authentic selves and to start working in their own unique ways for the future from their authentic selves. So I was so moved by the quality of sacred relationship that I had with him, but also that he had with his pupils and they had with me. I could sense the pulse of a new kind of truth and love. And that made me very much want to do this book with Chris, because I can think of no more important subject for us all at this moment as we face this devastating crisis than to truly turn to our own relationships and ask ourselves the question, can we live them with more sacred integrity, more sacred honor, more sacred courtesy, more sacred compassion, the divine world, and fuel us for the enormously difficult work ahead.
Chris, would you like to answer that as well?
Yes, I would love to. Well, like Andrew is saying, I was so honored to be with Andrew and spend days and days that we spent together. And you can imagine us talking through the wee hours of the night about the crisis, about the importance of the great shift in spirituality toward love and action, which Andrew has been an international herald for that. And that is, in my thinking, the greatest reformation we have ever seen in our spiritual thinking, that love has to be transformed into love and action, to the pursuit of justice and the pursuit of inclusion and the pursuit of peace and democracy. And we also were talking about this incredible evolutionary leap in our thinking toward authenticity and solidarity, understanding the crucial importance of claiming the freedom to be who we are and to live not from a false self, from an authentic self. And then we said, and how does that apply to relationships? So there we went, and we had another long discussion around how do these new ideas about sacred activism or love in action, authenticity, and solidarity, the fact that we are one with those who are suffering, we are one with those who are deprived their rights. How do these impact our romantic relationships? And so then that book came out of it. And basically what we were saying, and what I saw in my work through the last 30 years with couples and individuals pursuing romantic relationships, is that authenticity is crucial to maintain a relationship. We are understanding that if we want passion in a relationship, we must have the freedom of individual authenticity. And the other thing is that a couple is empowered when they together can develop a vision of sacred activism, a vision of love and action. We have seen that again and again. Instead of the couple being limited to look at each other and where every single issue become a huge issue to process, the couple now is standing in their authenticity, grounded in their authentic freedom. From that authenticity, finding a common vision, holding hands and looking outward. So they are hugging or holding hands, but their eyes are looking outward to how can we together make a contribution toward justice, toward democracy, toward peace, toward animal rights, minority rights, and so forth. And we have seen, Kelly, that makes a huge difference in maintaining romantic love, strengthening romantic love, and flowering and empowering romantic love into passion. So these issues of sacred activism, of authenticity, a profound freedom of authenticity, and of understanding that we are beings of solidarity, these have become the new tenets of romantic relationships, the new tenets that we are starting to understand and to look at. And so the book explores all of that, explores all these ideas applied to relationships, if they are romantic or if they are parental or friendship.
That's
The same
great.
principles apply to the three of them.
Yes, I find that I learn the most through
Said
relationships for sure. And learn more about myself. And what I love about this book is there's so many, you have the 6 keys, right? The 6 keys in a relationship. You define authenticity and talk about themes, because when I started Women for One, my goal was to learn about my own authenticity. And at first I called it a community of authenticity and inspiration. And then as I moved forward, I'm like, well, how do you define authenticity? How do we do this for ourselves to be able to move through the world powerfully, in service to the world, in service to ourselves, and in relationship? So do either of you have an answer to that? Because I've asked so many people that, and I mean, you both seem like experts in this.
Andrew, can I take a shot at that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And I'd love to hear you then. Kelly, I have worked, as I said, for the last 30 years around this issue of authenticity with hundreds of people, and it's really crucial. What I think is fascinating is we know intuitively what is our core personality. We intuitively know who we are in our personality, in our deep personality. We know what we like, what we don't like. We know what we are equipped to do and what we're not equipped to do. We know our orientations, not only our sexual orientation, but our orientation toward what really, what is it that how do we enjoy being? The image I would give you is horses. I used to be a horse person, and I love horses, and every horse has its own gait. Every horse has its own gait. And if you try to get a horse to walk or run not its own gait, which some people try to do that, then you break the spirit of the horse. Well, we as individuals have a certain gait, and that gait is unique to us, and it's our core personality. So that's part of authenticity. The other part is our heart and the desires of our heart, and to have the freedom to be able to say, this is the core desire of my heart, and that is not the core desire of my heart. To be able to say yes and to say no. Many times in spirituality, we are taught to always be positive, always say yes, but that can dilute the truth and create another false self, rather than finding what am I called to do in the world and what am I not called to do in the world.
So discernment is really important.
Yes. Create,
yes.
And what is it that I don't desire to create? So if we start with this issue of core personality and respecting that we come to the world as children with a core personality, we can call it archetypal personality or simply core personality, and respecting the freedom of that. And then out of that freedom, engaging the world and serving the world and respecting the core desires of the heart. And that's a big shift. And that is huge in relationships. When people do that with themselves and with the other person, when they honor and respect the unique authenticity of the other, not try to make them something else. And they also respect their core desires and not to try to force them, but coming together, building intimacy and passion through a coming together of two freedoms that are in solidarity with the world.
It's beautiful. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that?
What's so beautiful, what Chris said.
Yes.
I battle a lot with authenticity and explanation for it, because it's been my experience that the definition of authenticity has changed very much as I have changed and evolved in my lifetime. So what I feel authenticity is at this moment that I'm speaking to you is fidelity to both your divine consciousness and to your human self. Fidelity to the transcendent truth of your deathless awareness, and really being absolutely naked and in service to that deathless awareness that is also love, and also totally aware of your limitations, your qualities, your values, your conscience, your compassionate responsibilities in the core of this embodied divine life. And that kind of authenticity is really the ultimate goal in all the mystical traditions. It has different names in them. In Taoism, it's described as Sujan, which means being completely at ease, spontaneously reacting to each situation and event and being that arise from the fullness of yourself and from the fullness of the situation. And in Hinduism, it's described this state as Sahaja Yoga, and it's described as the highest state that you get to on the mystical path, because it's a state of absolute ease and relaxation in yourself, in your human self and in your divine self together, beyond categories, beyond any separation of sacred and profane. And for me, that's what authentic means at its highest. And anything that we feel or do that helps us go towards that level of pure transparency between the human and the divine in us is something that helps us on this tremendous journey towards the ultimate authenticity of Sujan, the ultimate authenticity of Sahaja, the ultimate authenticity of what Kabir calls in his greatest poem, the simple union, the merging of the human and the divine in pure relationship that expresses itself authentically in all relationships.
You say it so beautifully and poetically, and it's so quite simple as well, the way you say it, but you can feel that you've embodied it and experienced it. And I really love, Andrew, that you said what authenticity means for me at this time, where I am now, because it keeps shifting for me, and I think for all of us in our specific experiences, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a continual discovery, because what you thought you were authentic about can be revealed when you uncover more of your shadow to have been part of your limited craziness.
Well, speaking of craziness and shadows, I did have a question because, I have been a seeker my whole life in many different ways. And probably in the past 5 to 7 years, I've really been fascinated by how we can really, for both of you, a question, incorporate our darkness and our light and really learn from that darkness and that shadow and not avoid it and not shut it down, but really have it be brought to light, look at it and get really clear about it. And you talk about the paradox of evolutionary love in the book. It was a dialogue between you. And I kind of just wanted to touch on it because it feels like, the new age quote movement and every seeker out there is really looking for that action oriented sacred activism like you're talking about, but also moving away from the avoidance of not looking at things and just being love, but really diving into our anger, diving into our darkness to understand it and become more aware about it. So I'd love to ask you, Andrew, first, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, there is absolutely no way in which you can truly experience oneness with the one without radically understanding that God is working through chaos, terror, horror, death, as much as order, ecstasy, and peace. That is the fundamental recognition that transforms you from a baby to an adult. Then you have to really start to be able to bear the true rigor of self-knowledge. Because if you don't develop the strength to bear revelations about your own darkness, you will never be able to endure the rigors of the true mystical path, because every progress into the light will show a greater expanse of shadow, will illumine the darkness of your unhealed karma and the traumas that have erupted from your childhood and your own actions. What can evolve over time is an amazing dance between two kinds of really equally holy knowledge. And Jesus has put this perfectly when he says, what we are required to do is marry the innocence of the dove and the wisdom of the serpent. And the two forms of knowledge are knowledge of your light identity, knowledge of your essential divine consciousness. And the other essential sacred knowledge is knowledge of your own shadows and the shadows of the world and the shadows of the crisis of the world. And this knowledge is the wisdom of the serpent because it gives you a sense of your own fragility and limitation and madness, a sense of the limitation, fragility, and madness of all others, so much greater compassion, and many greater skillful means for really helping and dealing with others in the situation are born from this radical shaming and humbling and humiliating of one's own pretensions. And this is part of the great evolution of a new kind of human being.
Yes, yes. Chris, do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, from a psychological point of view, I think it is extremely important to realize that anger, sadness, anxiety are tremendously important feelings, and to reclaim them. They are creative feelings. And I think we have to stop calling them negative feelings or dark feelings, because they're not. You know, we have created a society that is the consumerist society, is a society where if you keep on buying stuff, you should be always happy. And unfortunately, the spiritual, a lot of spiritual teaching has followed on that and said, well, if you do yoga and you do this and you do this, you'll always be happy, you'll always be peaceful. Well, that's a violation of our humanity, of our sacred humanity. What we are coming to understand, Kelly, through the work on authenticity, is to be authentic means that on an everyday basis, you're going to be happy, you're going to have moments of happiness, you're going to have moments of unhappiness. And that's okay. That's the human experience. Mm-hmm. You're going to have moments of peace. You're going to have moments of anger. You're going to have moments of tremendous self-confidence, and you're going to have moments of self-doubt and anguish. And that's okay. That is part of the human journey, and it's essential. The thing is, the question is, how can we feel these feelings? And one, welcome them. And second, be intentional about them, which means live them gracefully. What we need to learn is how to live gracefully our sadness, our anger, our anguish, our self-doubt, our unhappiness. But to cut the human experience, to say that you have to be always happy, always peaceful, is to violate the spirit. It is ultimately to create either a sense of false self that is devastating, or depression in people.
Yep.
Exactly.
But once we welcome the fullness of our feelings and we learn how to be intentional and graceful about them, we realize that sadness is as creative as happiness, if not more creative. And anger leads us to a sense of deep justice if we go deeply into it. So there's a huge shift in our consciousness from positive spirituality and positive psychology to authentic spirituality and authentic psychology, where the human is seen as the incarnation of the divine. The human is not a mistake. The human is not something to get rid of. It's something to be deepened, to be, like Andrew says, divinized. But the human in itself is the incarnation of the divine. The divine is trying to walk the earth through our humanity. And that means the tears of blood that Jesus had on Golgotha, which were tears of anguish, and all other feelings. It's huge, and especially in romantic relationships, to be able to accept the fullness of our feelings and not to try always to think we're going to keep it all the time happy, because then we enter a level of stress where romance is destroyed out of that, rather than coming to learn how to love authenticity.
It's so beautiful how you both described it, and you both brought up incredible points about, but I really liked when you said it is violating the human spirit when you ignore the other aspects of some aspects of who you are.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there's another important aspect of relationships. I really want to get into this with you, Andrew and Chris, that I know you've touched on before in your own work, Andrew. It's the union of the divine feminine and the divine masculine in all relationships.
Yes.
But realistically, and this is for my community, especially with women, how do we aspire to that when the feminine has been so degraded in our society, and when misogyny and sexism are rampant still on many levels?
I think that's a very powerful question. And of course, the only answer can be with difficulty. But I think that it is possible because, after all, I am gay, so I understand at a visceral level what the rape of the feminine feels like, because living my life under the Hiroshima cloud of homophobia and feeling that radiation deep in the core of myself, as every woman has lived and continues to live, with that subtle shaming and that subtle dismissal, I know what you're feeling and what is felt. But I do know that there are tremendous healing powers in the revelation of the sacred marriage itself, that if you do private and profound inner work and have the absolute splendor of the creation and of yourself and of the body and of sexuality revealed to you, an enormous healing can take place. And if you're lucky enough to go on a journey into evolutionary love and find partners and friends and sacred colleagues who can help you enact this deeper love, then you can heal these terrible, terrible wounds and become emblems of embodied love, which is really the task of both women and men in this time, because both women and men have been wounded and scarred and brutalized in the psyche beyond belief. You cannot begin to comprehend how wounded men are. I've been so obscenely upset by the wounding of women, but as I grow older and really look at my male friends and look at what I know about what's happened to my friends who've been brutalized in the army and driven half crazy with stress, I see just the horrible price of this false masculinity also. So as a human race, we're going through redefinition on this fundamental level, and it's going to take tremendous courage and tremendous compassion to go to the end of this journey. Do you agree with me, Chris? Does that make sense to you?
Andrew, totally. And you embody that so beautifully. You embody in yourself so much of the masculine, the noble masculine, so much of the feminine. Kelly, I mean, what I would add here to the beautiful words of Andrew is that, we have been given, or we have been stamped with a vision of the shadow masculine for our society. We live in an empire, in a financial empire, and the empire needs people who will just do what they have to do at any cost. So we have violated the idea of the noble masculine, and it has been violated in men and in women. And it is so important, again, when we talk about authenticity, to understand that authenticity is always paradoxical. Like we talked, you can have peace and anger, you can have joy and sadness, you can have defeats in your life, and you can have successes. But also, it's the masculine and the feminine. It's realizing that authenticity is always both. It is embodying the quality of the noble masculine. If we want to call them around strength and affirmation and the ability to stand and speak one voice and be clear and all of that. I mean, that's traditionally how we talked about the masculine, and the unbelievable paradox of the feminine in its again how it has been defined as tenderness. I mean, the importance of tenderness, the importance of receptivity, the importance of an open heart, the importance of vulnerability, the importance of intimacy. And it is crucial. It is crucial as a man, I would say, for men to be able to have both. But it's also crucial for women. I mean, we're seeing a lot of women today, at least I've seen them in my work, who have lost the feminine too.
Yes.
Who have been into that empire vision of never wanting to be vulnerable, never wanting to go into tenderness, and therefore sexuality becomes really hard for them. And so this paradoxical, this is part of the new breakthrough, and you can see it in the work of Andrew so beautifully, how he constantly brings the paradox to us. So this understanding that authenticity is paradoxical, and we are called to be both, to always be both on every level, including and especially the masculine and the feminine. We have different, some people might have 70%, 30%, 50-50, 40-60. That's fine. That's individuality. But strength and tenderness, to just kind of make it very simple, has to be there, there. Courage and vulnerability have to be there. Otherwise, there's no way we can create intimacy. And when intimacy is lost, everything is lost. Everything is lost. When intimacy is lost, what are we creating? What kind of society are we creating? If we cannot be tender with each other and meet each other at a level of soft receptivity, as well as be able to raise our voice in the world for justice, but it's incredible. It's incredibly important that we really reinstate that paradox of feminine and masculine in both men and women.
Both men and women. You both have such incredible thoughts around this, and I would love to talk to you more and more about this book. I definitely want to ask one other question, because I really love that you both speak about the importance and the value of celebration in the book. It's something that I don't see a lot of people speaking about and writing about when we're talking about evolving and some of these deep concepts. And I think it's beautifully sacred and powerful. So if each of you could speak to that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'd just like to say that I think one of the greatest messages that we've ever been given is the message that was given through the Hopis at the end of the 20th century, in which the Hopis say we're in an age of tremendous turmoil. There's a great river and a lot is being destroyed as it rushes down. And then they give everyone in the world this advice. And they say, this is the time to celebrate, to make of your life a celebration. And when I first read that, I read that as an agonized European intellectual and thought, what an idiotic thing to say. We should be burning down the systems of oppression. We should be sobbing over the corpses of those who've just been killed. We should be reacting from our blazing hearts. But as I've grown older, I've realized the enormous, steady indigenous wisdom and life wisdom and sacred wisdom behind those words. Because what I've come to understand is that if you ground your life in sacred joy and sacred joy of celebrating the divine and the divine's presence in the whole creation and as the whole creation and the divine's presence and as all sentient beings, if you ground your life in that and in service of the divine in your sacred activism, then what you have access to through grace is an enormous energy of secret, passionate, compassionate joy, which fills your mind, your heart, your body, your soul, and gives you the courage and the energy to do really miraculous things with your life, your ordinary, extraordinary life. And this, for me, is the goal of the journey. This is the reason why I'm on the earth. This is the reason why you're on the earth, is to experience and live that.
That's so awesome. It will give us, right? It gives us much more energy and much more passion.
Much more. Celebration is the love making to life.
Right.
And if we don't make love to life, life will never reveal to us what life is, which is an unbearably amazing, terrible manifestation of the divine totality.
And I find as I celebrate and as I practice that, and I'm intentional about that, where I just went and hiked with my stepson and my husband and hiked a mountain the other day and just sat up there and just took in and celebrated the beauty of the world. I feel it more deeply the more my intention to celebrate is, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. But one of the things, and I'd love Chris to take it away, one of the things I've learned from Chris, and this is something I continually think about and salute Chris for having discovered, really, and for having made it available to us, is how Chris has taught me how to celebrate defeats. When we are in a cause, for example, and we fight peacefully for its resolution, and we come across a temporary defeat, very often that throws people into despair. Chris has taught me that at that moment, what anyone who was attuned to the higher spiritual truths of evolutionary love would do is to celebrate the defeat, celebrate the fact that you turned up in the struggle to begin with. Make a party out of it. That's what will give you the strength to get up the next morning and to get back into the sacred battle and to do what you can to resolve the situation. That is such a wise reversal. So celebration isn't only of the positive, joyful aspects of life, it's also a way of approaching the anger, fear, despair, grief, and defeat. That's what's so amazing about it. You can come to celebrate the fact that you grieve so much because it shows that you have a heart, that you're still human, that you haven't gone dead and cold while you're still alive.
Yes, so much so. Yeah. You know, when I ask people, why can't you celebrate? Why can't you make love to life, like Andrew was saying, on a daily basis, really on a daily basis? Interesting, the answer that I usually get are systemically the same. There are two answers. Is how can I celebrate when there is unhappiness in my life, when there is anger in my life, when there is sadness in my life, when there is so much grief in my life? And how can I celebrate when our defeats in our life? Well, that brings us back to this issue of reclaiming our humanity and understanding how our humanity is sacred. You know, our humanity has been carved by 400,000 years of evolution. 400,000 years of evolution. And if we keep on teaching that we have to transcend our humanity, we are really turning our back on evolution. But when we come and understand that our humanity is gorgeous, is beautiful, our humanity is the perfect imperfection that you title your book, Kelly, which is so beautiful. It is a perfect imperfection. Then we can celebrate that humanity. We can, like Andrew was saying, we can celebrate the grief in our life and realize that grief is actually intelligence, because any person who opens their consciousness to intelligence will see the beauty of the world and they want to dance for that beauty. They see the joy and they want to laugh and laugh and laugh. But they also see the suffering of the refugees. They see the sicknesses in their family. They see the children struggling with leukemia. And of course they're going to feel grief. They see the violation of democracy that is happening today. And of course they're going to feel outrage. They see that the human race might not make it if we keep on getting out of the Paris Agreement and we keep on destroying everything we can see around us just to accumulate profit for the very, very few. Of course we will feel anguish. So when we understand that the fullness of our humanity is the gem, the fullness of our humanity is the gem. And part of that humanity is that as we create, we go through defeats. Every artist will tell you that. Mahatma Gandhi will tell you that. Nelson Mandela will tell you that. Mother Teresa will tell you that. Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma will tell you that there is no way to create without defeats. That's how we are as human beings. Once we understand all of that, then there is no reason not to celebrate. Not to celebrate. If it is defeats, unhappiness, successes, victories, grief, losses, breakup of relationship, new relationships, we can celebrate all of that because it is part of the human journey. And when we take it to relationship, it's beautiful, because then we don't wait for our partner to have this one lifetime success to celebrate them. We can celebrate their authenticity. If not on a daily basis, at least once a week, take them out and say, and when they say, why are you taking me out? Because I want to celebrate who you are and the fullness of your being, including your vulnerability and your defeats and your fears and your trembling. and have that partner just like open up with a huge smile that they are being seen and celebrated in the fullness, the sacred fullness of who they are as journeyers in this world.
Oh, both of your passion around these subjects is so inspiring. Now I feel like going out and celebrating. It feels so
Good. That was awesome.
Do that.
That was
passion
awesome.
and joy. It's so wonderful. So, in closing, I really want to encourage our community to get this book. It's called Evolutionary Love Relationships, Passion, Authenticity, and Activism, which is such a great title. And I loved it. I have a lot of I come back to it, which is a really great way to be able to read a book. I love coming back, opening up all the different dog ear tag books, tagged pages in it. And I really believe it's going to guide each of us to powerfully enrich our connections, that deepens our bonds and transforms the world we live in a new paradigm for relationships and for humanity. So I thank you both. If either of you or both of you, I'd love to hear maybe a closing words or a piece of wisdom that you want to offer in addition to all the other wisdom you've offered today to our community of, I call them Truthtellers, women that have shared their stories from around their world, and they've shared their celebrations and they've shared their defeats, and they've been really courageous and brave in doing so. Andrew?
I would just like to say to all of you who are listening how absolutely lovely it has been to be with you today, but also to invite you to truly think of those words, evolutionary love relationships, and to ask yourself, how can I love and exist and be and act in such a way that I become part of the evolution of a new humanity? And for you amazing women who have already done such amazing work, I just want to invite you to recognize that work as profoundly evolutionary, as really working with one of the major revelations of our time, the revelation of the authentic, empowered beauty of the sacred feminine that you represent. So I bow to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Chris?
Yes. First, I want to start by really offering a deep, deep-hearted gratitude to women, because it is women in general. I mean, men have played their part too, but it is the leadership of women in the last 30, 40 years that have really opened our eyes to authenticity and to the importance of relationships. And that has been very crucial in our thinking. And it's the leadership of women. I mean, it is women who have spoken about the importance of the body and being true to our body, being true to our feelings, being true to who we are. And it is women who have spoken about the importance of relationships, because if we don't have thriving and fulfilling relationships, then we don't have the power to be able to stand up against injustice and to stand up for justice. So we owe a lot to the leadership of women. And I also want to say that I want to invite as many of our listeners as possible to join us in the dialogue that Andrew and I had around evolutionary relationships. You know, it's not, none of us can say, "Oh, I have it." It's a guiding star. Mm-hmm. You know, we are walking toward it. But join us in the dialogue of what will make a relationship really enriched with intimacy, really a coming together of two freedoms who become then passionate about each other's freedom, and who can engage in wonderful intimacy, wonderful love making, wonderful celebration. And also with our children, how can we bring that evolutionary relationship so our children are seen in their unique authenticity and are guided at a very young age to be citizens of the world, at a very young age to go into sacred activism from a place of freedom. So it's a tremendously important dialogue that Andrew and I have in this book. And I would love people to join us and to, when they read the book, send us emails, send us your thoughts, so we all continue on that journey. It is tremendously important. tremendously important. So thank you so much for.
Thank you both, Chris.
your
And yes, and Andrew, thank you as well. And all of your information will be up. And I do encourage our community and the women and the men in our community to reach out and continue this dialogue. I think it's the most important dialogue we can be having for the future of our world. So I am so honored to have spoken to both of you, and thank you so much for your time. And thank you for the service that you've given to yourself and the world.
Thank you, Kelly, and blessings on your work.
Blessings to you, Chris.
Thank you.
And to you, my dear friend Andrew, so good to hear your voice, my man.
And you, and you.
All right, everyone. Big love.